ready to get it on. Go!
5.
We're on express elevator to hell. Going down.
2. 1. Mark.
Hot as hell in here. Yeah, man, but it's a dry heat.
Knock it off, Hudson.
Movement!
What's the position?
Can't lock in.
Talk to me, Hudson!
Multiple signals. They're closing. I got signals. I got readings in front and behind.
Where, man?
He's right, there's nothing back here.
Look, I'm telling you, there's something moving and it ain't us.
Well, that's great. That's just fucking great, man. Now what the fuck are we supposed to do? We're some real pretty shit now, man.
You finished?
That's it, man. It's game over, man. It's game over. What the fuck are we gonna do now? What are we gonna do?
17 days. Hey, man, I don't want to rain on your parade. We're not going to last 17 hours. Those things are going to come in here just like they did before, and they're going to come in here, and they're going to come in here, and they're going to get us.
Take a portable terminal, go out there and patch in manually.
Oh, yeah, sure. With those things running around, you can count me out.
They cut the power.
What do you mean they cut the power? How could they cut the power, man? They're animals.
I want you...
Hello, everybody, and welcome once again to GeekFest Rants. My name is Carlos Perone, and today I am doing a special episode that I really was not planning on doing. A couple months ago, we had a loss in the Star Wars community with Carrie Fisher. We've talked about it a little bit before and how that has sort of impacted us in terms of, our fandom and how we felt about it, how, she was kind of like the first of the big heavy hitters in the Star Wars world, and how it kind of compared and it was different than, for example, the Star Trek community, where we've already gotten used to losing some of their big names, all the way back to Roddenberry, and little by little, their main stars. Right now we seem to only have Shatner left from the big three, as we had, not too long ago lost Leonard Nimoy. Well, this past weekend, we found out that an actor has passed away who wasn't part of any gigantic, Star Wars or Star Trek-y kind of franchise. The actor I'm talking about is Bill Paxton. Now, I've done a show in the past about what could be described as cult actors. People like Bill Paxton and Michael Ironside and Bruce Campbell, Michael Biehn, these type of actors that seem to show up all the time, especially in genre projects. And for me, Bill Paxton was a very special actor. I had never heard of him before until I had seen Aliens back in 1986. Now, you got to keep in mind that in 1986, I'm 16 years old. I'm at the peak of my movie consumption experience of my life. That's kind of started in my early teens all the way through my, I would say, late teens. It kind of petered off a little bit after a while, with school, especially college. You don't have that much time, to go see that many movies. But during my teenage years, I was 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. I was consuming movies like they were going out of style. I was spending, easily a Saturday in a movie theater, maybe watching 2 or 3 movies. It was one of those things where back then, you really didn't have the big monster corporate movie chains. They were all basically mom and pop places where I used to go to. And the places that I used to go to were back in, let's think about this. This was back in Queens, New York. There were 2 theaters, I believe, that were my biggest ones. One of them, I think, was called the Jackson, which was because I think I lived in Jackson Heights, and that was the name of the theater. That theater, I believe, had like 2 or 3 screens. That's where I first saw Return of the Jedi, I remember. And then the other theater was the Boulevard, because that was on Northern Boulevard. And that's a theater that they had I think 4 screens, maybe even 5 screens. I remember it had more screens. And the cool thing about it was that the Jackson, I don't want to call it an upscale theater, but it was in a nicer kind of part of town. The Boulevard was more in a slightly dicier part of town. And because of that, it was a different type of theater. Again, it's the type of theater where you could walk in, you would pay your, I don't know, back then $4, and you go see a movie, and then as soon as that movie's over, you just hop onto the next screen. And then when that's over, you hop onto the next screen because nobody really was watching security-wise. All they cared was that you pay for a ticket, and they didn't care really how many times you saw a movie. In the Jackson, it was a little more difficult. But getting back to this time period, these early to mid-'80s, we've talked about this before also. The 80s, especially 1982, was a gigantic movie year. We did a whole show about how many of our genre movies that kind of started it all for us. Your Star Trek Wrath of Khans, your Tron, even around that time period, The Thing, Conan, all those monster hits, not necessarily financial hits, but films that kind of stuck with you. Well, I remember that around, I would say maybe 1983, 1984. It was after Return of the Jedi. Around the time of Return of the Jedi, I would say from 1981 to 83 or 84, I was watching everything that I could see, that I could get my hands on. I would go see some of these horrible, horrible movies. Your Hunter of the Future, Space Hunter, I think, or something like that. Really bad movies. Movies that were financed, with a lot of money, but they completely tanked, like Explorers, Creator, My Science Project. And in that wave of movies, amongst all of those movies, I probably ran into Bill Paxton, probably, in some of them, but never realized at the time who he was. Even by the time I got to The Terminator in 1984. I remember The Terminator was a movie that I went to see because back then I used to watch Siskel and Ebert. And that was around the time when I actually started to pay attention to what a film critic would say about a movie. It would kind of feel good or feel bad when somebody agreed with you or disagreed with you regarding a movie you're either going to see or had just seen. And the buzz around Terminator was so critically huge in terms of what a good movie this is for a low-budget type of film, and what a great thing is to have an actor like Schwarzenegger, who had just come off of more or less Conan the Barbarian, another 1982 monster movie that I absolutely adore. But like I said, at the time, I wasn't really too aware of it. It happened to me also when I went to see, I think it was Blade Runner. When I went to see Blade Runner, I remember I only saw it because it had Harrison Ford, and he was coming off Raiders, and it was a feeding frenzy of Star Wars and Raiders, and I'm going to see anything this man does because and Blade Runner just felt differently. At the time, I don't know if I had seen Alien yet. That came, it might have happened around that time because then I was able to make the connection, well, who's this director who's directing this film? And, at that point, I might have seen it, just to start working my way through the library of that particular director, Ridley Scott. But I remember Blade Runner just felt differently. There was something different about it. It wasn't Star Wars, it wasn't Raiders. There was something else, something new. And like I said before, because I started to pay attention, and I don't want to say study, because that's a little too much effort, I think, if you use the word study filmmaking. But, as I started growing older, we're talking about 14, 15 years old here. I start to notice things about films. Oh, this is different. Why is this different than that? Why does this make you feel different? Why does this look different? A movie like Blade Runner gave you everything you wanted from a genre perspective in terms of you have the effects, you have the stars, you have the unbelievable looking scenery, but there's something else there that can kind of draw you in. Well, same thing with The Terminator. The Terminator, as the movie reviewers were talking, gave you something more. It definitely wasn't just a special effects movie because it was a low-budget movie, and the areas where special effects were awesome, but they were kind of minimal if you really think about it. In this film, once again, I run into Bill Paxton. He was playing the punk, one of the 3 punks in the beginning of the film that attack Schwarzenegger and try to steal his, they try to rough him up and he ends up stealing their clothes and I guess killing most of them. He's the punk with the spiky hair. But again, he's only playing a little tiny bit part. At this time, by 1984, he had already done a number of films. And let me just go through some of them. Now, let me make this perfectly clear. Bill Paxton was a machine of acting. The man just seems to have worked nonstop in so many films, but particularly genre films. He came from what I understand, the Roger Corman school of filmmaking, and that is he had some interest in filmmaking, in film production. He had done a music video at one point in the really, really early 80s, had gotten some notoriety from it, not much, had bit parts in movies like Crazy Mama, again, if you're dealing with the old Corman factory. He had a bit role in Stripes, which, you think about it, wow, Stripes is awesome, but, it's one of these things probably if you blink, you miss it. He did something called Night Warning. I have no clue what that is, never seen it. Taking Tiger Mountain, never heard of that. Lords of Discipline. Here's a movie that I actually ended up seeing probably on HBO in the early 80s, that one of these movies they kept playing. Again, he had a bit role, but he was surrounded by a lot of pretty, soon-to-be up-and-comers as far as the rest of them go. He did a movie called Mortuary. Again, not familiar with it. Streets of Fire. I remember Streets of Fire. I think it was Walter Hill. It was one of these action-y type of gang 50s. I think it's supposed to be I don't even know if you really know what year it is, but I think William Dafoe is in it. Pretty good movie. Again, I couldn't tell you he was in it, but apparently he was. He did something called Impulse, and then he did The Terminator. And the way that he landed The Terminator was because when he was working in these Corman films whether he was working as a set constructor or a special effects guy, behind the scenes kind of guy, he met James Cameron, and those two kind of clicked. And Cameron would tell him about all these ideas he had for films. And finally, when he had his chance, to actually do something, he cast him in a number of his films, but the first one being The Terminator. Again, he doesn't really steal the show. He's just another bit part. Then he did a movie called Weird Science. And again, we're in the 80s now. Weird Science was one of those teenage pseudo sex comedies, if you will. Not necessarily a Porky's kind of comedy, not R-rated, but kind of like a PG, like a heavy PG. I couldn't even tell you if PG-13 was really, really around back then. But this is a movie, it's a very slapsticky movie. Anthony Michael Hall, he's the lead, and Bill Paxton plays, I believe, his older brother, who's a complete jerk. And he had not so much like Terminator, because like I said, in Terminator, he gets a little lost. He's wearing a lot of kind of makeup and stuff, and his role is very short. But in Weird Science, he actually has a couple of minutes to deliver some really cool lines, which became very memorable. So he's already kind of dipping into 2 different areas. He's doing the genre stuff, very sci-fi, if you think about the Terminator, obviously. And then he's dipping into the comedy stuff. So he is able to kind of stretch his talents a little bit. Before, he might have had some of these other movies we talked about, but his role is so minimal that he really gets lost. 1985, like I said, Weird Science. 1985, you have Commando. Okay, here we go. Another movie where he has a small part in a movie that is a huge vehicle for someone else. And again, he's kind of playing with Schwarzenegger. Schwarzenegger is definitely the star of Commando, and if you think of Commando, you really think of Schwarzenegger. But he had a role in that film too. Then it's 1986. Now, 1986, as I mentioned earlier, I'm 16 years old. I now have ingested as much of Alien as humanly possible. I've seen it on VHS, rented it. Keep in mind, I didn't see it in the movie theater. I was too young. I'm not even sure if it was playing by the time I got here in 1979, so it might have already been out of movie theaters. But the video industry was starting up in the early 80s, so eventually I got to see it. And the thing about Alien, I might have mentioned this once before, is that I never really had access when I was in my early teens to R-rated horror, for example, or R-rated anything, really. Granted, you could rent stuff, but you got to remember the video industry itself took a while to kind of move and actually start offering enough video rentals for you to be able to just go and see it. Now you just stream everything or you order it through Netflix and it's here in a day or in a second. But a long time ago when I was 16 years old or 12 years old, it was way, way more difficult. The video store that I used to go to, again, wasn't part of any chain. There was no Blockbuster Video back then. These were small mom and pop places. And the closest place I could find to where I lived back in Jackson Heights was a little tiny shop that, looking back, I can't believe that they actually functioned as a business and that I actually was going there. The guy who ran the thing was a little creepy looking guy, and the store was the size of a walk-in closet, really. It was this tiny, tiny, tiny store. But again, video was brand new, so it was just so exciting to all of a sudden you see all these videos on the wall. But the problem was that the store was so tiny that you couldn't really see the videos, the actual videotape holders. You couldn't see them. So a few of them would be on the shelves because there were very few shelves, but the majority of his collection would be on a binder or a book. So you would have to thumb through the book. Now, believe me when I say this, if you had 3 people in the store, it was too crowded. You would have problems moving around because, like I said, once again, it was the size of a walk-in closet. And every now and then they would get, new videos, and they would only have like 2 copies or 3 copies. Remember, these were the times where they didn't have like 16 copies of something. No, they only ordered maybe 1 or 2. And I remember they gave, because I arrived at the right day, they had a little tiny, I think, Terminator fold-out poster. Tiny, tiny little thing. And I absolutely loved it. And I was completely obsessed with this movie because I just absolutely loved the story, the effects, the actors, the craft. So through that store was really the only way I could get my hands on any R-rated material. The other place I could do it was through HBO. HBO back then, again, I'd done a show about this too. In Queens, early 80s, the cable really hadn't penetrated into the suburbs as much. Cable was available in certain areas, and I believe maybe even Manhattan might have had it and some faraway areas, but the boroughs, they were still taking their time trying to get into Queens, Brooklyn, and the Bronx. So we had what was basically a microwave antenna with a little box, and you would mount this microwave antenna in the roof of your building, in your fire escape, anywhere that you could mount it, and you would aim it at the Empire State Building, and with this wire coming out of the antenna, going into this little box. The little box had a little on-off switch and a tuner. You could actually fine-tune, if you remember what fine-tuning means. So that's how you would get your cable. So that's how I would get HBO. Now, getting your hands on one of these antennas is one of those typical, it fell out of the back of a truck type of scenario. You would have to buy it from a guy who knows a guy who knows a guy. That was 1982. It was the only way we can get cable because cable still wasn't around. So through HBO, I would then every now and then be able to watch R-rated movies. And one of my biggest gateways, I would say, into R-rated horror, specifically horror, was a movie called Terror in the Aisles. And I have talked about this before. This was a compilation documentary kind of film about horror movies and I guess classic horror scenes, which was hosted by Donald Pleasence, out of all people. And I watched that a number of times, and I recorded it, I remember. And in there, I finally got to see this clip of Alien and the chest-busting scene in the kitchen, in the commissary. And that's what kind of said to me, all right, wait a minute, there's something really freaky about this movie. You got to watch the whole thing. So I either watched it then on cable or I just rented it at a little dinky store. So as 84 ends, Terminator is doing great business. I'm wondering, what is this guy going to do next? What is he going to do next? What is he going to do next? And back then, I think it must have been through Starlog magazine, the word got around that he was going to be working on a sequel to Alien. 2 years later, bam, It's July. I remember July, might have been July 4th weekend. One of those weekends, it was July. And I started to see some pictures, again, on Starlog magazine, behind the scenes. But I'm like, wow, that looks really cool. There's that actress that was in the first one. These guys look different. Look at all that gear they're wearing. It looks so different. That movie completely blew me away. And it has stuck for all these years. You know, if I had top 10 films, which I probably do, I just haven't really gotten around to writing them down. Aliens is in there. It's in there. And the thing about Aliens that, to me, makes it different than some of these other films that Bill Paxton starred in was that he, once again, gets this little tiny role. He's not a co-star. He's like a B player. He's a secondary kind of actor. The main story takes place with the main actress, Sigourney Weaver, obviously, and all the bad guys. And then you have all the supporting actors, you know, all the bad guy monsters. But his particular character was so damn funny, memorable, and quotable that, to me, that is pretty much, if not the highlight of his performances as far as genre material goes. But there's one more. But this one is just, it's just there, and there's just no way around it. I would compare it to the way that I feel about Star Wars, the way that I feel about Star Trek, Raiders of the Lost Ark, you know, a lot of Spielberg films like Close Encounters. He did something with that character that not only do I absolutely love the film in general, but he's almost like a bonus to the whole film. The film is fantastic. I absolutely love it. I love the director's cut with the extra stuff, including him. He even has a couple of extra lines in the director's cut, you know, with the deleted material. But let me just put it this way. I remember watching the film, and I was so blown away by it, to the point where I was really upset that his character dies in the film. And it's like, no, you can't kill this character. You need to be using this character more. You need to see more of this character because he's that damn good of a character. He's so funny. I used to think that they should have made a sitcom out of that character, which was completely ridiculous. But it is just such a great little role. And from what I understand, you know, even up to not too long ago, you know, when he would have, you know, when he would go to do some autograph signings or shows like that, he even said that, you know, half of the stuff that he signs is all Aliens related. So that character has stuck with people. And in a way, it's, for me, it kind of created a model of a character, of a person that I really admired, even though I knew nothing about. There was nothing about that actor really that I knew, but all of a sudden, you know, he's on the radar, and it's like, oh my God, I got to start finding out what this guy's doing, and he's got to do more. Whatever the hell he does, he's got to do more of it. So at that point, like I do now, and like I've always done, I start going backwards, and I start going forwards. So by going backwards, like I said, that's when you really go back to, say, Weird Science. Oh, wait a minute, he was in Weird Science. Oh my God, he played Chet. Oh my God, that's so funny. So as you go backwards, like I mentioned before, you don't have a lot of stuff really to chew on. So it's primarily forward that you start going with his materials. After Aliens, because he was still involved with Cameron in terms of, you know, they're still good friends. They were still good friends. Even the crew, they were pretty good friends. And at the time, I believe Cameron was involved with somebody, with a director. Her name was Catherine Bigelow. Recent Academy Award winner Catherine Bigelow from a couple years ago. And she was making a vampire film. So what she ends up doing is a movie called Near Dark. She basically takes easily half the cast of Aliens from the year before, which I guess she was pretty familiar because if she was dating Cameron, she was probably all around these guys. And they make this Western vampire, a modern Gothic Western vampire film, which to me, and, you know, don't get me wrong, there's a lot of vampire films out there. I'm not a fan of the Twilight stuff. I'm not a fan of some of this other, you know, stuff. But I do have my list of, if you go to the vampire genre, here's what I like. I loved Bram Stoker's Dracula, the one Coppola made. I like some of the older Dracula stuff, you know, the Christopher Lee stuff, the Peter Cushing stuff. You know, some of that stuff, I can take some of that. But as far as modern stuff goes, to me, Near Dark is it. It doesn't get any better, any more realistic. Again, there have been some great movies. Let the Right One In, I think, was one of them, that have gone into that genre. Even Blade, if you want to go in the direction of a superhero type of comic book vampires. I used to watch True Blood. It's a little different taste, if you will, no pun intended. But for me, 1987, Near Dark, again, another home run in terms of here's a movie that's different. These actors are doing their thing. Bill Paxton has a great role, and he's such an a-hole of a character, and he's great. He always, when the role is needed, he's always great at playing a complete bad guy jerk, like really jerk. And in this movie, they do everything. They just do everything. It's horror, it's action, and I wish this movie would have spawned a sequel somewhere, but it never got the time to do it. Everybody went in too many different directions. Now, what's funny about this movie is that right around the time this movie came out, I think it was either right after it or the following year, Bill Paxton got together with some friends and formed a band, out of all things in the world. The band only produced one record, as far as I know. And I think one of the co-founders of the band was an older Devo, an ex-Devo guy. But anyway, I have the album. I bought it at the time. I remember, and again, this is the early days of cable. I used to watch a show on cable. I think it was called Movie Time. It was basically a channel that the cable system had, and I'm sure it came out of Hollywood, and all they did was play movie trailers. That's all they did. They had nothing. They have no shows. They had no production value. All they had was a host or hostess, for example, just rolling trailers. Just rolling trailers. And this is around the time of Near Dark and Pumpkinhead. Speaking of Lance Henriksen, another one of these cult actors I talked about way back, and he was part of this group, and he was part of Aliens, and he was part of Near Dark. But what was cool was that while all these films were playing, they started playing the music video from Paxton's band. The band was called Martini Ranch. And I'm probably one of the few people in my town that actually went and bought the album. I actually ended up getting it on CD like 20 years later. You're never going to find a hit in any kind of, Billboard Top 100 or anything. Because a lot of the stuff that they did is very Devo-ish in terms of that kind of new wavy kind of music, 80s electronic new wave, but it's also rock. It's a kind of like a hard rock type of thing too. And there's a song called Reach that they kept playing, I remember. And I absolutely loved it. It was a Western kind of song, kind of funny song. And again, the entire cast pretty much of Near Dark, because it was around that time, showed up to do the video. And from what I understand, Cameron ended up directing the video because they're friends. Aside from the cast of Near Dark, which is Lance Henriksen, Janet Goldstein, you also had a couple of people from Aliens show up. I think Michael Biehn has a little cameo. I think Judge Reinhold has a cameo out of all people in the world. The guy who played, I think his name is Mark Rolston or something like that. He's got a cameo in it. And even the director of Near Dark, Catherine Bigelow, has a cameo. There's a lot of cameos in this thing. And it's a funny little video. I absolutely love that song. So that kind of kept things going. So to me, now you have a combination of Aliens and Near Dark, and that's as good as it's going to get. And that is enough that kind of carries me, wanting to continue to follow this actor's career, for the next, I don't know how long it's been, 20, 30, 40 years. I don't even know anymore. I can't keep track. He did a lot of films after that, but he always kind of stuck to that model. He's always kind of like the second banana or the extra guy. He's the character actor. He never really, for a while, takes the lead. Let's take a quick break now and listen to a little spot from our friends at I See Robots. If you're into anything having to do with retro, vintage toys and 80s shows and all kinds of 80s and 70s vintage retro kind of games, television, movies, all of that geek culture that we love here at GeekFest Rants, take a look. When you visit their site, they have a podcast called The Toys R Us Report, and we strongly recommend it. So have a listen.
Tune in to the Toys R Us Report for your weekly dose of pop culture talk that's out of this world. Movies, TV, toys, comics and more every Wednesday on the IC Robots radio network at icrobots.com. What are you waiting for? It's time to get down or come up.
All right, we're back. Thank you guys from IC Robots. And let's continue with our show. So, what happens after Near Dark? He's got something called Pass the Ammo. I think I saw it, wasn't too impressed. Slipstream, I think is a sci-fi film. Next of Kin, more of a crime action-y type of film. Back to Back, never heard of that one. Brain Dead, and again, one of those over-the-top horror films, I think. Last of the Finest, crime films, about cops. Navy SEALs, this was another... This was like Young Guns, if you remember the 80s. Well, you get all these young actors. Well, this was Navy SEALs. It's like, wow, Navy SEALs. Now, the thing about you got to remember about this guy is that he usually dies in most of his films, which is a bizarre thing. We have the actor Sean Bean now, and everybody makes fun of the fact that he always seems to die everywhere. Well, Paxton used to do that all the time, too. After Navy SEALs, he does Predator 2. Predator 2, again, he's got a secondary kind of role. Danny Glover is the lead, more or less. And he is, once again, in the Predator kind of world. But the movie wasn't that great. I'm not a big fan of Predator 2. But just because he was in it, I went and saw it. I don't even remember where I saw it, probably on cable or on VHS. One of the things about Paxton, a little trivia thing, is that he's appeared and has gotten killed on Terminator films, Alien films, and Predator films, I believe, just like Lance Henriksen. They share that in common, I believe. The other thing that's funny about Paxton was that, one of his most memorable lines in Aliens, it's that game over line that you'll hear a lot. We even have it as part of our opening. Just by accident, I swear to God, believe it or not, when I was starting to put these opens together, these little bits for the show, it was like 2 weeks before what happened to him. That line, from what I understand, wasn't in the script. It's something he improvised, and it became like his tagline. That's like his line. Anyway, Predator 2, The Dark Backward. Again, weird. He did some weird films. Dave Agron, never heard of it. One False Move. One False Move is a very good cop drama. Somewhat of an independent film. Very gritty, very kind of noir type of film, I would say. He's playing it completely straight. And this is something that I guess most actors want to do. They want to step out or reach out into other genres, and he does in this point. He's no longer just the jokey, wisecracking secondary actor. He's the lead in this. And it's an excellent, excellent cop film if you ever, have a chance to see it. Then he did a movie called Trespass, another, I don't know if you want to call it action cop adventure type of movie, not as serious as One False Move. He did Monolith, I think that's a sci-fi, Indian Summer, another, I think a comedy, Box and Helena, don't remember much of that. Tombstone. Now, Tombstone is one that pops up every now and then because Kurt Russell, I believe, is in it, and I think Michael Biehn is in it, and he is in it. It's when they did the Wyatt Earp. One studio had Wyatt Earp and the other studio had Tombstone, and you had like dueling actors playing similar roles. Well, he was part of the Tombstone gang, let's say. So he kind of got a couple of good lines in there. Again, he's not the lead, but he's playing with the big boys. He's got a lot of big stars around them. Now we're hit 1994, and he returns once more to work with Cameron. Cameron has another Schwarzenegger vehicle called True Lies, and he gives Bill Paxton another little side role of the sleazy car salesman, kind of like somewhat of the comic relief in a way, even though you still have Schwarzenegger's partner as the real comic relief. But Paxton really, really, is there for the funny parts of the movie. This was a big one too. True Lies was a big movie, big budget. It made a pretty good chunk of change, so, that helped him out a lot. Then he did Frank and Jesse. He kind of returned to the model of Western, and that worked out for him. He did Future Shock. I don't think I've ever saw it. The Last Supper, didn't see it. Apollo 13. Here we go. Now he's in a big, big superstar kind of movie. He's got I don't want to say a bit part. Tom Hanks was the star. And then everybody else under him was kind of like the secondary crew, the secondary group. And he was part of those guys. And that was a great one for him. That was a really good one. Ron Howard directed that one. He followed that up in 1996 with Twister, another great hit. Now, the thing about Twister was that not only is it genre in a way, because the movie is very heavy special effects because it has to do with, tornadoes and that sort of thing and tornado chasing, but he is the co-star. Now he's no longer the bit player on the side. He's actually the star with Helen Hunt. They're both co-stars. So he's kind of got a bit of a hit on his hands now. And that, I'm sure, opened up the doors to a lot of other things. But still, he would dip in and dip out of the genre material. Then in 1997, he once again teams up with James Cameron for Titanic. Here he has a smaller role, but an important role. He's the actual explorer who's discovering the famous ship. Even though the entire movie, the majority of the movie, is taking place as a flashback almost of what is happening to some of the key characters, mainly Leonardo DiCaprio and Kate Winslet. But the film is a monster of a hit. It puts Cameron back on top once again, wins him a Best Picture award, and it really does help out the entire cast to kind of push their careers along. But it's almost forgettable, the fact that he's in it, because he does play a much smaller part, than the two leads that are enormous. He then did A Simple Plan, and I believe this was a Sam Raimi movie, and this is around the time where Sam Raimi was also trying to kind of break into the more serious films, and this was a kind of like a crime drama type of deal. Another great film. Billy Bob Thornton is in it, and Paxton was also excellent in it. Another one that I would recommend, just like One False Move, if you want to see some of his more serious stuff. He follows that up with Mighty Joe Young, basically a remake of the original, old black and white. Not that great. I think it was a Disney film. U-571, a World War II film. He's got a small role. I believe he probably died. I'm pretty sure he dies. I couldn't tell you for sure, but odds are he probably died. It was a cool little World War II film. Not a lot of, I don't know if he got a lot of traction, but it was worth it to see an actual submarine, related film. So that's kind of cool. Vertical Limit 2000. That's, I think that one's about climbing mountains and snow caps and that sort of thing. Action-y type of thing. He's in it. No big deal. Not a hit. That is followed by Frailty. Now, what's cool about Frailty, it's again described as a gothic horror film. He gets to direct. He finally gets a chance to direct. He's got Matthew McConaughey as the star, which is excellent. He's got a top star, and he creates a really cool little horror film. Got pretty good reviews. It didn't really explode in terms of, it didn't generate a whole bunch of other horror films for him to direct, but it gave them, another kind of feather in his cap. He appeared in Spy Kids 2, again, as a bit player. Ghost of the Abyss, he basically narrates that one. It's one of the James Cameron documentaries that he does about, underwater research and that sort of thing. He was in Resistance, don't remember that. He was in Spy Kids 3D, another Spy Kids movie. Nothing to write home about. Club Dread, don't remember that. Thunderbirds, wow, that was a flop. That was a really bad one. They were trying to reignite the Thunderbirds back from the old Thunderbirds. Really bad. Haven, don't remember that. He does some more documentaries. Magnificent Desolation, it's about the moon landing, walking on the moon. Again, documentary, don't remember too much of that. Greatest Game Ever Played, he directed again. This time around, it's about golf, because apparently he used to play golf when he was young. Really don't remember much of that movie. Nowhere near as good from what I understand as Frailty. Now, after he's done directing this film, he kind of takes a slight break from film because he starts shooting a series on HBO called Big Love. Now, I watched Big Love, and I liked it. It was a pretty good series. It lasted about 5 years, I think. So it kept him busy on television. They did a lot of episodes. But he got to do a movie every now and then, but not as frequent as he was doing them when he was not on television. He had done television before. A lot of them were just little parts here or there. The most memorable one I remember, again, when you start going backwards, as I mentioned earlier, was that he had a small role in an episode of Miami Vice. I remember he played a cop whose girlfriend was a stripper, I think, and he was trying to like get her off the streets. And she was a hooker or a stripper or something. And I don't think he succeeded. But it's kind of funny when you see these actors, show up on old stuff. He also did an HBO film, I believe, called A Bright Shining Light. I think it was for HBO, and it was about Vietnam, a drama. Not so much a war film, but more like a war drama film. And he got he did get some good reviews for that. But so what's happening at this point between 2006 and 2011, he is in television world. So he's kind of slowing down on the film side. But even though he slows down, by the time he's done with Big Love in 2011, he has a bit part in a movie called Haywire, which I absolutely love Haywire. He is not as outstanding in it. The movie itself is better than his character, but you're getting to the point now where it's just fun to have him show up. Just seeing him in a movie, it gives the movie a little extra something that, for me, it makes me feel good when all of a sudden it's like, oh, look who's there. It's Bill Paxton. And this is an older Bill Paxton now. You got to remember, when he first started out, he always kind of played like I don't want to say a kid, but maybe like somebody in their 20s, in their early 20s. And he's kind of kept that look to him. But by 2011, he's an older guy. And, you could see wrinkles in his face and his hair is thinning a little bit. And he does start to play roles that are more age appropriate. Especially in Haywire, he's playing the star's dad. So he's an older guy in this film. Haywire, absolutely fantastic. I strongly recommend it. 2012, Shanghai Calling. 2013, The Colony. Also, Two Guns, Red Wing. Again, a lot of these films, they almost, some of them, they sound like they go straight to video or straight to cable. A lot of them, you really don't know what the hell they are. $1 Million Arm. Don't really remember much of that one. 2014, Edge of Tomorrow. A great sci-fi film with Tom Cruise. He has a small little bit part as a military trainer type of guy, not exactly Hudson from Aliens, but it's you can kind of tell that you're getting that feel of giving him a part, and it's him, and you love every word that he says because he's going to say something really ridiculous. Definitely, and on top of it, a great movie, a wonderful, great movie, an unusual. This is around the time where where Tom Cruise also made Oblivion, another great sci-fi little movie that he made that was, pretty much overlooked. 2014, Nightcrawler. Now this is a serious film with Jake Gyllenhaal about stringers, people that are like freelance journalists who go to crime scenes and just take pictures. A really, really interesting film with him in it. Very kind of seriously creepy, especially Gyllenhaal. And he has done, I believe, a couple of more films recently that I'm not too familiar with. Term Life, Mean Dreams, and currently The Circle, which I don't even think has been released yet. So that's going to be interesting. This happens a lot when people pass away, actors pass away. You still get a backlog of films sometimes of stuff that they've done, a year ago and stuff like that. So we might get something else, pretty soon with his name on it. On television, as he's doing these films, he's also alternating every now and then with some television work too. He did the Hatfield and McCoys. I think it was like a miniseries. He got him some award nominations for that because it was pretty popular. And for genre geeks like us, Agents of S.H.E.I.L.D. He had an ongoing role, lasted, I don't know if it lasted maybe 2 seasons or so, or maybe 1 season. They kind of put an end to that. He did Texas Rising, another Western-y type of thing that, he seemed to start to go back to every now and then. And what's also ironic is that on television, he had just finished, I think, shooting the first season of Training Day, which is based on the film Training Day. CBS had done a season of, adaptation of that show with him as the lead cop, which, as I speak right now, I think they've only aired 4 episodes. I don't think it was very popular. I don't know if they'll play the rest of them. I have no idea. Don't know if they'll recast the show. But what's interesting is that this is a guy that kept working. He just kept working no matter what. And like I mentioned before, all of a sudden, I'm going through my Facebook feed and, his picture shows up. And usually when his picture shows up, it's like, great, they just cast him on something. And then it said something about Bill Paxton, genre actor, passes away at 61. I'm like, what? Oh, man. And talk about what a downer that is. Because, now granted, I never met the man. I might have been in conventions where he was nearby and I might have seen him from far away, but I've never actually, met him one-on-one. I do have an autograph here that I got from one of my friends. And it's funny because, when you try to get an autograph from somebody, you try to make it special in terms of, like I said earlier, half the autographs he gets asked for are for Hudson because Aliens was his big thing. But I remember I said to my friend, because he happened to be at the same location where he was going to be, I said, if you give me an autograph, tell him that I'm a big fan of Martini Ranch. And that's something that's weird because it's like not a lot of people know about that. And the autograph that he got from me says, Carlos, best, Bill Paxton, find time for self-culture. And that's one of the names of the songs in Martini Ranch in their album. So what's strange about this particular actor passing away, and don't get me wrong, if you guys watch the news, 2016 was a bloodbath as far as music and television and film goes. We've lost so many people. We just started to lose track. It was just like unbelievable how many people were dying this past year. And it seems to kind of hopefully not continue, but we've had some pretty big losses even recently. And he is, this isn't a guy that had a legendary career or anything. He's a bit player. He was a B actor. He was a cult actor, a genre actor. But I think a lot of it has to do with the nature of people like us who are into this sort of thing, this genre thing. One of the characteristics that, some people take it to an extreme, hopefully I don't, but where we obsess over things that are somewhat unknown or insignificant or unpopular. And when you find something that not a lot of people are aware of, you grab it and you hold on to it tight. And with some people, I understand, and I've seen it happen, is that once that thing becomes popular or becomes known to other people, it starts to lose its shine. And some of these people then drop that thing and go to something else because now that's too popular. They need to be around things that are unpopular so they can kind of claim ownership of them. Once it becomes too popular, move on to something else. Well, for me, Bill Paxton's always been something like that. The fact that the guy never got too much traction in Hollywood always made him kind of like this idol that you had in your back pocket. The type of person or the type of actor, let's say, or performer or artist that odds are, if you even mentioned him in a conversation, and if you even encountered people who even knew who he was, you would end up having to defend his career for people because he was so kind of like under the radar. And in a way, I mean, at least for me, it always seemed to work that way because of the fact that he was always not exploding, in terms of career-wise. He was always kind of like one of us, one of the genre geek type of people that don't seem to get anywhere. And all they have really is their love of whatever it is that they're either collecting or watching or admiring or obsessing over. And he was always kind of there for that purpose. Now, granted, a lot of times, you always hear this, never meet your heroes, because you never know. You might have a bad experience and they might not be the type of person that you imagine that they are. And that works for a lot of people. I mean, a lot of people, you get disappointed when you meet them. But I've always heard good things about him. And, I watched a lot of his interviews. And I know he was doing more and more conventions as he got older. And I think he might have even been to some of the Comic-Cons in the past, especially when he was promoting, upcoming films and that sort of thing. But like I said, his passing, for some reason, seems to kind of hit a nerve an even bigger nerve than, for me, somebody like Carrie Fisher. Because he was kind of, like I said, a cult guy. He was kind of under. He wasn't exploding. In a way, it's kind of like, having to kind of face the realization that some things are ending. They're coming to an end. You no longer have the certain safe areas where you could discuss, your genre projects and your likes and your interests and that sort of thing, and bounce those ideas off other people. The fantasy that, you might be telling yourself for a very long time that, maybe this whole thing that you're into one day will be your career, for example. Most people don't do that. Most people end up doing an offshoot of that or something completely different, or they do it. I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm sure there are people that actually do end up doing the things that when they're young, they're trying to aspire to. But something tells me the majority of the people don't hit that bullseye. And I don't know why, but this is kind of bringing it all to reality in terms of, these people that you would identify with, that you would think of almost as family in terms of, oh yeah, this is somebody that lives down there. I don't get to see much of them, but they're always there. And then you see them pop up here and there. They'll show up in a movie. They'll show up in a TV show. And yeah, that's my guy. That's my act. You get that feeling of ownership of, the closest thing I would imagine to having a team of something. That's my guy in my, doing a show. This kind of puts like a period on the end of a sentence. It kind of tells you that's over. Now, I'm not saying that, my interests are changing. I'm just saying that this is going to be one less person, if you will, whether that person is a close friend or somebody who's not a close friend, somebody who is kind of like an imaginary actor that you admire. You admire his characters, you admire his work. And it's kind of like I said, it's like another way of understanding that these things are ending. These things are not meant to last forever. But not to sound too down about it, but it is a pretty sad situation. He went in for some kind of procedure and he died. That happens sometimes. 61 years old, leaves behind a wife and I believe 2 kids. But we move on. Our show moves on. We are now on our 299th episode, which I have never thought we would reach this. Our next episode will be 300, and we are changing. We are changing the show, not so much the format. We are still geeking out over stuff. We are still nerding out with television and film and all those things we love. Superheroes and conventions and, oh my God, toys. I am completely surrounded by toys here. But the show itself is going to get a fresh new face. We've already started sprucing up the website. You're going to hear a little bit of a different format in terms of how we spread out the topic or topics that we do per episode. Hopefully it's something you guys will enjoy. So, on behalf of myself, I would like to thank you for joining me today. And don't forget to find some of these older Bill Paxton films, rent them, stream them, download them, watch them, enjoy them, and we will see you here next time at GeekFest Rants. Bye-bye, everybody.
So, you guys think you can pull one over on me, huh? Huh? You got everybody synced to the same bullshit story.
This isn't bullshit. This is a Pershing missile chip.
It's Chet. My name is Chet. And I didn't think it was a whale's honey. Hi, Nanny. Hi, Grampy. I'm not a moron, you know. Was that my grandparents? Are they dead?
Oh, no, they're just resting.
What are they doing in here?
I put them in there. I didn't want the boys to get into trouble. Quite frankly, they weren't having a very good time at the party.
Not having a good time? Do you think they're having a good time being catatonic in a closet? Do you have any idea how disrespectful that is?